I mentioned a couple of times that Hasidim have a kind of introduction to a mitzvah. And Sfardim also use it. If you take a look on page 5 in the Cedar, or 4, depending upon what language you read.
Should I get this Cedar or which?
That Cedar is good.
Sure. I use the other Cedar.
Yeah, but this will be the same.
Okay, sure. Which page is it?
5 or 4, depending if you read Hebrew, then it'll be 4.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, you use 5. People who don't have a Jewish education, and I think who are a bit naive, ask, how do you think of God? Masculine or feminine? It seems like we always say God is He.
Mm-hmm.
So those who know a little bit, first answer, look, God is not He and God is not she. Whether you call it sex, whether you call it gender, God is...
Because we acknowledge him as the melech, the king, and generally the king was a male, so it's like the easy, like physical way of acknowledging.
I don't think so.
But the only time we mention him in feminine form is when Shabbat comes in.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if that's true. We'll see whether that's true or not. We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see. God, as the creator of the universe, is surely beyond sex and beyond gender.
Sure.
And if you ask, well, but in the Hebrew language does use masculine and feminine forms, and almost always the form that's used for God is masculine. The answer is that what you call the masculine form really does two different jobs. It's not always masculine, it's sometimes neutral. For example, if you have a mixed group of men and women, the words that you use are what you call masculine words.
Sure.
That's not because they're all men. It's because what we call masculine also doubles for neutral. Many mitzvos in the Torah are stated in singular form, using what you call a masculine form, but they apply to women as well. So you can't bring any proof from the fact that the references to God have the so-called masculine form, because it isn't always a masculine form. Sometimes it's a neutral form. Having said that, there is throughout Jewish literature masculine and feminine terms and words that are used to refer to God. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, is always used in the masculine form, and Shechina, which is a reference to God, Shechina is feminine, always feminine. So there, what's explained is, we're not talking about who God is. I'm certainly not saying there are two gods, one masculine, one feminine. That's nuts. What we are saying is that God interacts with the world in different ways, and one way of interacting with the world for certain purposes
is... Was Shechina considered like a noun form? Like you're acknowledging?
Shechina is a noun.
Shechina.
Ha-Shechina.
Right,
The Shechina, right? Certainly a noun.
So it's a feminine word. So
it's feminine, sure.
Interesting.
So you have descriptions of how God interacts with the world, and one type of interaction is male, and the other type of interaction is female. There we do distinguish. And then the question is how they relate to one another. They are different because they're not gods. They're different ways that the Creator deals with the world. Now, if you know a little bit of Hebrew grammar, just hold on to page 5,
sure.
But I want you to take a look.
I can read this.
That's page 4. Very good. So, take a look on page 82. Shia Malos, this is the 130th Psalm.
Mm-hmm.
the part in the gray.
Sure.
Now, it starts off, Shir Malot Mimamakim Kwasich Hashem, Shem Shema V'Koli, Tienezach HaKosh Kol Klas U'Noi. Now, Im Avonos Tishmor Ka. So, the way people usually...
Is one after Tishmo, is that considered Hashem's name as well?
No, it's a verb. The verb.
After Tishmo.
Yes, that's right. The Yud A is one of God's names. Gotcha. That's quite correct. Now, let's see, how do they translate it here? Yeah, right. So the normal way to translate it is, if you, God, preserve transgression, then who will stand? Because we'll be lost. But in fact, in Hebrew, tishmor can mean atah tishmor, or it can mean he tishmor. She will preserve. It's exactly the same word. And the Ramban suggests, on the basis of Kabbalah, that here it should be she preserves. God being referred to in the feminine. If God, she will preserve transgression, then who will stand? So there are at least sometimes, even in the holy writings, where you can say that God is referred to as feminine, because...
It's the same way, but if you do at, vehu, it's different, I guess. Who is Yishmo?
That's right.
At is Tishmeri. So this one, it's...
But this is he. Right. Not at and not who, but he. He, Tishmor, Atah Tishmor is exactly the same. They're exactly the same. Okay, so now this formula at the top of page 4, since you understand Hebrew, this formula says something quite remarkable. I'm doing the mitzvah. Why am I doing it? For what purpose am I doing it? L'shem, for the sake of yichud, uniting, kuchabrichu, which is the masculine form, ushchinte, which is the feminine form.
Where are we reading?
Very top of page 4.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
L'shem, yichud, kuchabrichu, ushchinte. Now, I should just caution you, kuchabrichu on the one hand, and hakadosh baruch hu in Hebrew on the other hand are not the same. Because kudsha in Aramaic is the same as kodesh in Hebrew, not kadosh. So they are different. Ramchal makes a point of this in one of his letters. But it's close enough. It's close enough for our purposes now. There's something called kuchabrichu, which plays the masculine form, and something called shchite, which plays the feminine form. And we are saying that when we do this mitzvah, we're doing it in order to unify, to unite those two forms of interaction. And it's not just this mitzvah, this is a general formula for many mitzvahs. At the bottom of the page, you have the same formula.
A quick question, does this apply to, each time you use a different word for Hashem's name? It's used, I'm always fascinated about this, like each time you use Hashem's name in a different way, it's the purpose, because Hashem has multiple purposes. You know what I mean? If you use Aleph Lamed, and then you're referring to God in a certain way, right? Like there's God, because God has multiple names. In each way, it's
that's not what you said before. Now I think you're saying you're right. Right.
Yeah,
each name refers to a different aspect of which God interacts with 100%. 100%.
Like the Shekhinah, for instance, refers to what was there referred to. I know what Shekhinah means, but I guess what
right. Well, the name that's usually applied to Shekhinah is Aleph Dalet Nun Yud.
Okay.
That name. That's the name it stands. Stands in the same place as Shekhinah stands.
It's the same. It's almost.
Right.
Oh,
right.
I see.
But there are many names, and each one refers to a different aspect of what's going on. 100% right. That's exactly right. So now, this sounds like the masculine and feminine interactions aren't naturally united. They aren't naturally together. They could be together, they could be not together.
Sure.
And we're doing the mitzvah, and this is like any mitzvah, doing it in order to unite them. So the question is, what are these different forms of interaction? And why do they need to be united? And how did it get to be that sometimes they're not united? And how does doing the mitzvah unite them? When a chassid, and Sfardim also, the Ashkenazim don't tend to do this. This is what they have in mind when they do a mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
So, in Kabbalistic terms, the two parts of the interaction are giving and receiving. Something needs to be transferred. Something's in a place and has to move from that place to a different place.
Sure.
Typically, it's the male who gives and the female that receives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I must say at the outset, this is absolutely crucial. Don't confuse giving and receiving on the one hand with active and passive on the other hand.
What was active and passive?
In other words, a person...
I know what it means, but I know active and passive, but like, what do I mean these terms?
So let me explain the confusion that I'm trying to avoid.
Yeah, sure.
The confusion would be for someone to say, well, the one who gives is active,
Right.
and the one who receives is passive.
Mm-hmm.
That would be his thought to combine the two concepts and say, giving is being active, receiving is being passive.
It seems like they're both being active, no?
Good for you. That's exactly right.
Because like they're fulfilling their role.
They're fulfilling their role, and number one. And number two, what motivates the interaction? What motivates the interaction? Who starts the interaction? Let's imagine we talk about someone who's teaching something. If a student comes and says to a teacher, please teach me X, and then the teacher teaches him, here the interaction was started by the recipient.
Sure.
And indeed, it's far more likely for that to happen than for someone to say, I have something to teach, and meet someone in the street and say, hey, listen to me for a half hour because I want to teach you something.
Exactly.
That's much, much unlikely to happen.
Exactly.
And in fact, in our
The person
interactions...
that come up to you as a stranger saying, hey, I'm going to teach you something, you're just going to listen.
I have other... thank you.
I want you to listen.
I have other things to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But if the student wants to learn,
Sure.
that's a motivation for the teacher to teach him.
Sure.
Same thing is true in interaction with God, although there are interactions of both types.
It's the idea of active listening, no? Active.
That's a very good example. Active listening.
I guess for the teaching purposes, it's active listening because it's not like you're passively doing something, you're actively doing something.
100%. You're 100% right. And often you have to prepare yourself. If you know, by the way, in yeshivas, it used to be that way. The head of the yeshiva would put up a list of sources. Mm-hmm. And he would say, in a week, I'm going to lecture on these sources. You prepare the sources so you come in prepared.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Then you'll be able to understand what I have to say. So the recipient, in this case the student, has to work to prepare himself to receive.
Sure.
So his receiving is active, not passive. And he better pay attention while the lecture is going on. Same thing, exactly the same thing.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's 100% correct. So the interaction is where the zocher gives to the nekeva, but it can be the nekeva that motivates it. The nekeva says, "I'm ready to receive." And that's what triggers that zocher to give what he has to give. Okay, now, everything is built on this duality. Everything is built on this duality of giving and receiving. Our sources tell us that everything in the creation comes in two aspects, and the two aspects need to function together as one.
Mm-hmm.
The higher up you go, the more necessitated it is that they're going to function as one. Indeed, sometimes the two aspects of male and female are just two aspects of one thing.
Sure.
In one case, there are two things, but they're continuously in contact. When you get down to what's...
Does this apply more like, let's say, like a couple relationship?
Yes, it's like a relationship in a couple, 100%.
It's kind of like,
100%.
or even, but you say for zachar nekeva, it's kind of...
That's right. The word zachar nekeva here play out in human life as male and female.
Yeah.
But their source is much more abstract. But the idea is still the same of a giver and a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Now, part of what's going on here is this. The giver has something to give. As long as he has it, it's inert.
Sure.
It doesn't do anything. It's only when he gives it to the recipient that it can be functional, where it can actually achieve something.
Sure.
So he needs the recipient. Otherwise,
I think this error applies just in each like you see in different ways. Let's say
I think that's right.
I don't know. The first thing came to mind in a natural form when you're, I guess, you're let's say you're trying to become pregnant, right?
Yeah.
In natural form, it's to give you receiving.
100%.
100%.
100%. That's right. Pregnancy.
In pregnancy, a woman cannot give birth if you don't receive.
That's right. That's 100%. 100%
That's
correct.
like that. That's a given. It's not like.
That's right. 100% correct.
I guess like in a physical sense, where like you're trying to provide for the family. Generally, it's like it is common that the male is working and the woman is a housewife. But that's changed today. That's a whole different topic.
It's not only changed today. If you take a look at Eishes Chayil, the description in Eishes Chayil, which comes from Proverbs, is of the woman running the economics of the house. She does it all.
Interesting.
So that's a norm. It's not that it's required, and a man does sign a document saying, if necessary, he will support the family.
Sure.
But those women who choose to support the family economically are not doing something modern. And it's as old as Yiddishkeit.
Interesting.
So I used to make the same mistake that you made, and someone showed me a kuntrus, an essay that was written, it was published, and where the person said, look, if you study what King Solomon wrote 3,000 years ago. You see, it's definitely not new. Okay, so now, by the way,
fascinating. I've read recently the Rishon Khan, but he said that mainly focuses on the idea that they're both active.
Both active.
Or proactive.
But he's not earning money.
Saying, the male is.
He's not earning money.
Then how is he otherwise?
In Eishes Chayil, he is not earning money.
Interesting.
There's no question there of any economics on his part whatsoever.
No, what is he doing otherwise?
He's learning Torah, and he's
from an education standpoint.
That's right. He's not earning
Educated.
money. I think your observation is correct. It's a very general thing. Let's suppose somebody has a box full of bullets. Somebody's got to shoot them.
Sure.
Now, have the infantryman out there with a gun with no bullets.
Yeah.
Well, it's not going to work. The guy with the bullets has to give it to the guy with the gun, and then he can shoot the bullets, right? It's he gives and he receives it. When he receives it, then it becomes functional. So that's a general idea here. The one who has and gives over to the other, the one who has is, in a certain sense, he has, but he's powerless because he can't use what he has. And that means that the only way the success takes place is through a relationship between the two of them. The one who receives has to be prepared to receive and use. The one who gives has to be prepared to give. Now, of course, if he is not assured that the recipient is going to use it correctly, appropriately, or there's a need for the recipient's activity, he may not give. On the other hand, the recipient knows that without receiving, there's no raw material there to be used. So when things are ideal, they recognize their interdependence, and they cooperate on achieving the goal by the giver giving and the recipient receiving and using in an appropriate way.
Exactly.
Now, when might it not work? Well, it might not work if, for whatever.
Can you hear right from that?
Sorry?
Can you hear right from?
Yeah.
Sure.
It might not work if the recipient has a job to do, but the conditions are not right to do the job.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in what we're talking about here,
well, if the roles aren't, let's say in a relationship, right? The roles aren't set. If you know what I mean? If the person wants to give isn't ready to receive, and the person receiving is not ready to give, if that makes sense. Let's say a person.
Not on the level that we're talking now. Not on the level we're talking now.
Sure.
It's a little bit like. You have a treasurer who pays the debts of the corporation. Now the treasurer takes his instructions from the president or from the group that runs the company.
Okay, right.
So now, suppose the president says, let's see, we owe this money, but if you pay it now, you're going to push the one you're giving it to into a higher tax bracket, and his taxes are going to break him. So I'm telling you, don't pay him. It'd be bad for him if you pay him.
Sure.
It'd be bad for him if you pay him. And he'll appreciate it if we pay him late. Because then it'll be next quarter, and the next quarter he's not going to earn so much money, and it won't push him into a higher tax bracket. So it can hold back. So the president says to the treasurer, I don't give you authority to disperse that money. The president has control over the money. The treasurer takes orders, and he doesn't give him the means to do it. Okay, now, in terms of these modes of divine action, what the male and female forms of interaction play a role in providing for the world, for people and the world generally, the various things that keep it alive, keep it running, and keep it functioning. Now the question is, well, what will be done with those resources? Where is the world holding? What is its... what benefit will be achieved if you make those resources available for the world? So it's the male that gives over to the female the resources, and the female implants them into the world. Now let's take, for example, the loss of the temple. The loss of the temple was not just a punishment for past failure. You did things wrong. You worshipped idols. You defiled the temple in various ways, so taking it away from you. No, it's much more than that. It's that if you have the temple, you'll do worse things. It's like preventing a child from playing with matches.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a punishment.
Which is really a protection.
Yeah. Exactly.
You're really protecting him.
Interesting.
So here the temple was a resource that would lead us to further failure.
If there wasn't a destruction, even let's say the first temple, for example, could have led to worser things than just simple destruction.
That's right. So then the male says to the female, I'm withholding the resources. I'm not giving them to you. You can't disperse them because it'll be bad for the recipient. Mm-hmm. The female initiates the interaction. This is what it says in these sources. By coming to the male and saying, look, here are our children, people, let's say. Look what they're doing. Look at all these mitzvos. I'm bringing you all these mitzvos. These mitzvos show you where they are. They show you what they're prepared to do. They show you what their priorities are, what their commitments are. And therefore, it's worth it to invest in them. She presents the case for investing in them. He responds to the case by transferring to her the power to give, and then she gives. But she has to make the case. Mm-hmm. And therefore, in terms of what we were talking about before, usually she initiates. She comes and makes the case. He responds to the case by giving, and then she distributes. It's that kind of interaction. So this illustrates it.
What's an example of distributing, I guess I'd say?
I'm sorry?
What's an example of distributing? Let's say, for instance, when she initiates.
Life, peace, cooperation and understanding, right? These are things which she can promote by the conditions that she provides. Exactly. But of course she doesn't have she doesn't have it on her own. You say leisma bigama klum. That level has nothing of its own. It gives out what it receives. So it requires the cooperation. So now, given what I told you, you begin to understand why we have this formula at the beginning before we perform a mitzvah. Mm-hmm. We perform the mitzvah in order to unite the male and female forms of interaction. Why? Because when I do that mitzvah becomes part of what the female presents to the male and says, look, they're doing these mitzvos. Since they're doing these mitzvos, they deserve the gift from above. You give it to me and I'll give it to them. So therefore I'm doing it in order to affect that union. Mm-hmm. Now, the male and female interactions are very complex. The male and female characteristics here are very internally complex because you're dealing with a complex world. You're dealing with a world with a lot of different dimensions. The higher elements in the structure are much less complex than the lower elements. The lower depend upon the higher, but the lower articulate the circumstances in our world to a much greater degree. Okay, so that's how this formula starts on page 4. Now it goes on. Bedechilu urechimu. Those are words in Aramaic for awe or fear and love. Yeah. the chilu is, they translate fear here, but it's more like yira, and yira is awe and fear. Rechimu is love.
Okay.
And now, this picks up on what you said before. Liached Shem Yud Hey. That's what you picked up before, that the letters Yud Hey are a name of God. Be Vav Hey, to take the name Yud Hey and add to it the Vav and the Hey, to make the four-lettered A, which is the complete name of God, the Yud Hey Vav and Hey.
It's interesting that you mentioned before, it's a shorting of the name of the God.
I'm sorry?
Yudin.
That's right. It's an incomplete name of God, and that's when it says that God is going to be fighting with Amalek until Amalek is eventually eliminated from the world. That's the name which indicates the time until Amalek is eliminated. As long as Amalek is in the world, God's name is not functioning completely. That's why it says, Ki Yadol Keis Ka. Milchama Amalek Midor Dor.
That's why you say partially, and that's why it's like saying God's name. That's why I wouldn't say God's name in vain, I guess. Like the idea of not saying God's name.
No, Yud and Hey is a real name of God. And if you use that name without in an appropriate context, then you have taken God's name in vain.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But it is a name of God. But here, what we're saying is, we're addressing the possibility that the male and female are not united, and we're addressing the possibility that the four-letter name is functioning in the two letters, without the last two letters, because the name is not united. And it says again, B'chud Shleim, a perfect union, in the name of the whole Jewish people. So we'll come back. I'll come to that in a second. Now, let me put in a remark here, because again, I'm just guarding against misunderstandings. To unify. I've met people who think to unify A and B means to make them identical, to make them into one in the sense that they become identical. The same thing twice. That's dead wrong. That's dead wrong. To unify here means to take two separate parts and put them together in a way in which they are parts of a larger whole. If I have a flashlight with no batteries, and batteries, no flashlight, I don't get any light.
Sure.
When I put the batteries into the flashlight, I have unified the batteries and the flashlight into a single functioning flashlight.
Yeah, exactly.
But batteries are batteries, and flashlight is flashlight. They haven't become identical.
Plus or minus for batteries. What do you mean? Plus or minus. You need a plus and minus to make one. Same thing.
So now
You can't function a battery with a minus and a plus and a plus.
So to unify does not mean to make identical. I have seen people say that we're talking about unifying male and female. It means there'll be no differences between male and female anymore. Absolutely not. It means they'll be functioning together in a way which makes them into a larger whole, where each one is a part of the whole, and the whole does things which neither one can do alone. So, now, how do we do that? We do that with fear and love. Fear and love also. Fear, as I said before, fear here includes awe of greatness, of awesomeness. There too, you have a pair of attitudes, which are very different from one another, but which work together. And you only have real fulfillment if you have the two working together. And the reason is this. If you think about it for a moment experientially, emotionally. What's the difference between fear and awe? Let's say take awe on the one hand and love on the other hand. Love is identification. You can't love an X. You can't love something unknown. To love means to identify with the other's qualities, to identify with them, to agree with them, to approve of them, to feel that you want to participate in partnership, in realizing those values, those goals. Love is a matter of connection, sharing, closeness. Or, on the other hand, when you look at something, you say, wow, Now, of course, we say this, in a flippant mood after the third martini. That's awesome. But when you say that's awesome, about what? About athletic performance? About a piece of music? About a piece of poetry? About self-sacrifice? What did I hear about now that... oh gosh, I can't remember. My wife told me a story this morning about someone who did something absolutely awesome for somebody else. It may have come to me. So, when you say something's awesome, what you're expressing is, it's way beyond me.
Is all, I know that all is the root word of awesome?
Sorry?
Is all the root word of awesome?
That's right, yeah. Awesome means full of, it calls out awe in you. It's worthy of awe. So, it's a sense of distance.
Yeah, sure.
A sense of, I'm much very small, this is very big. Mm-hmm. So, neither one is complete without the other. Love, identification, sharing, and understanding can give you the illusion that you and the other are on the same level. That might not be right. On the other hand, awe can give you the impression that the distance is so great between you that there can't be any relationship. There can't be any connection. So neither one is appropriate without the other. And the question has been asked, but then if they really have opposite feelings attached to them, opposite conceptions attached to them, how do you unify them? How could you possibly unify them? The Rambam, in the second chapter of Yesod Torah, at the very beginning, talks about drawing close, and then when you appreciate God's greatness, being thrust backwards. So it sounds like a pendulum, and it sounds like it's impossible to have the two of them simultaneously.
Which source you said it is?
Rambam, Maimonides.
Yeah, sure.
In Yesod HaTorah,
Perek
Beis, beginning of Perek Beis. So I think the answer is in the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu invites us into a relationship. Let me give you an analogy. Let's suppose that you can receive an invitation to a dinner party. Dinner party. There are 25 people there, and you're invited. So how you look at the invitation will depend a lot on who's sending it. Maybe it's a neighbor on the block, and he's celebrating the birth of his second child, and he's making a barbecue for the block, and he's sending you an invitation. That's nice. Maybe I'll go, maybe I won't go. Let's say the mayor of your city, and he's doing it because you have worked in elections, and he appreciates it. There are other people whom he appreciates, and he's making a dinner party for the people who worked in elections. Okay, mayor, yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. If I have to be out of town, I'm not going to cancel my trip to go to the mayor's celebration. Let's suppose it's the king of the country, and he's having a dinner party for 25 people out of a population of 1.5 million, and you're invited because of the things you've done for the king. I think you're going to be there. And I think you're going to be there. You had a trip, you'll cancel the trip, you put the trip off. The king's invitation is more important. So, the very fact that he's king makes his invitation very precious, because he's inviting you into a relationship with him. The greater he is, the more precious the invitation. The fact that he invites you tells you, contrary to your expectations, and maybe contrary to your understanding, he wants a relationship with you. Then the very fact that you stand in awe of him increases the love of the opportunity of having a relationship with him and a partnership with him. That is one way in which the awe and the love can not only live together, not contradict one another, but the one can be the cause of the other. The awe causes the love when you add to the awe the invitation to stand in a relationship. So, by the way, the Zohar says that when you do a mitzvah, the mitzvah has two wings, and those wings enable it to fly up to God. Mm-hmm. One wing is the awe with which you did the mitzvah. and the other is the love with which you did the mitzvah. Which means that if it's emotionless, if it's just a matter of duty, it's going to crawl. It's not going to fly. It's still appreciated, but it's not going to fly. Okay. So the formula here says.
You're not tapping into the love aspect or the awe aspect. You're saying, right?
Say again.
When you fulfill the mitzvah, there's no love, there's no emotion attached. Just like a simple duty, like a task.
Right. That's right. Then that's right. Then that could be an expression of awe.
Sure.
But not love.
Well, right.
So here.
Wait, what about the alternative? Is there such thing as a mitzvah done only out of love and no fear?
Yes, because as I said before, if it's done wholly out of love, I'm going to speak about this more tonight. We're talking about misunderstanding great people. You could have the illusion of the one for whom you're doing it as being on your level. And that will spoil the performance also. For example, there are psukim which stress the fact that although you're doing what God commanded you, and if you're on a high level, you're doing it for God, God doesn't need it. You don't make him any more perfect by doing what you do. And you could easily miss that. So yeah, that awe has to be maintained. Otherwise, the love is not of the real thing that you're supposed to be relating to. So both of them. But now, what are we talking about here? We're talking about uniting the male and female types of interaction. We're talking about uniting God's name. We have to express our own unification. To do that, it's not just throwing a pebble in a pond. We have to live a unification. We have to unify awe and fear, our awe and love, in our performance, in order for it to have the effect of unifying above. So here again is something called Isus de Lasata. We are providing the instance of it, the example of it, and that then becomes the impetus for the response from above. The final piece, it's a very profound 2 lines here. In Hebrew, it's 2 lines. And the final words are, B'Shem Kol Yisrael, in the name of the whole Jewish people. And this is a little more easily to understand. It's a little bit more on our level. They used to say in Europe that if a Jew in the Volozhiny yeshiva who's studying Torah will lift up his eyes and be distracted, a Jew in America will intermarry. What? Why is that? Because the Jewish people as a whole forms a single unit. And what happens to one part affects another part. Mm-hmm. It's as if we're all joined by one bloodstream. You know, if God forbid a person has an infection in his left hand, the right hand couldn't sit satisfied and say, oh, it's only the left hand. What's it got to do with me? Sorry, there's one bloodstream, and if it's in the left hand, it's going to travel to the body, and you're going to be infected also. So the Jewish people, in this respect, function like a single composite entity, where everything that one Jew does has an effect on what other Jews do. And there are a lot of applications of this. For example, there are 613 commandments in the Kabbalistic literature. There are 613 aspects of the soul. There are 613 elements in the body. Each mitzvah corresponds to some aspect of the soul, some aspect of the body, which means that you need the benefit of all 613. Otherwise, some part of you goes undeveloped and unnourished. Well, how can you do that? There's no human being to whom all 613 apply. If you're not a Kohen, you don't have those mitzvos. If you're not the head of a beis din, you don't have those mitzvos. If you're not a Levi, your circumstances, if you're not a farmer, then all the mitzvahs of farming don't apply to you. How do you get access to those mitzvahs? One answer, there are many answers, but one answer is that when another Jew does a mitzvah, if you are connected to the Jewish people, and that's not a trivial if, not everybody's connected, but if you're connected to the Jewish people, when he does a mitzvah, you get the benefit of that mitzvah. What about sacrifices? So some say, they go so far as to say, that we can have benefit from the sacrifices that were brought 2,000 years ago. Because the Jewish people is like a single body evolving in time. You know, I suppose, that in your body there are no atoms today that were there 7 years ago. The atoms are being recycled all the time. Atoms are lost, new atoms are gained. So you are the same person because there's a continuity during the periods of replacement that makes you the same person. Okay, a people is like that also. A people has as constituents individual human beings. Some die, others are born, but there's a continuity of the whole, and that means that what happened 2,000 years ago could still be alive in the people so that you could benefit from it. Let me give you an analogy. This is not analogy in quality, but once this was saying, this is an analogy in physically which you could pay attention to. Mm-hmm. You may have had this yourself or seen this. You get a scar at age 9. That scar will be with you till you die. Certain scars will stay with you till you die. The replacement of pieces of skin replicate that feature of the skin, and that feature of the skin remains that way. I have a toenail. I dropped a board on my toe 40 years ago. The toenail shattered and got twisted a certain way, and that's the way it grows. It grows shattered and twisted. That's the way it grows. For 40 years, it's been growing the same way. It doesn't get repaired. Not everything gets repaired. So those kabbanos, those sacrifices that were offered 2,000 years ago, created a certain spiritual element in the Jewish people, and we are the same people. And since we are the same people, we can get the benefit of what they did. So this is one way in which a person can have the benefit of all 613 mitzvos without actually performing every one of them. And when we say here, when I do a mitzvah, and I say I do it in the name of the whole Jewish people, I'm dedicating myself to that integration. I'm saying that what I'm doing now is not just for me. I'm doing it as a piece of the Jewish people, and I wanted to count on behalf of the Jewish people. Yes, you wanted to say something.
Oh, no, I remember. Alui Neshama, is that kind of the rededication of something from the past?
It is, but it's much more narrow. Ilui Neshama, usually we're talking about, let's say, a child for a parent.
Okay, sure. Okay.
So there, the child really is a continuation of the parent.
Sure.
A parent trained the child and loved the child and provided resources. So what the child does is really a continuation of the operation of the parent in the world. And that's why mourning for a child goes on for a year, whereas mourning for any other relative is only 30 days.
Why is that, you said?
Mourning, Avelus.
Yeah, sure.
For a parent, a child for a parent goes on for a year. It's a whole year.
Why is that, you said? Why is there a difference?
Because the child is living out the consequences of what the parent did.
Sure. When
it's a sibling or when it's a husband and wife, so that's not true anymore. Mm-hmm. That being the case, it's a 30-day recognition of the fact that you lost someone precious to you. But for a child, it's much different. It's much different. And much different consequences. So here you have a kind of social aspect of every mitzvah. Yeah.
So if the Jewish people is a kind of unified organism that even displays its unity over time, to what extent can I, as a member of the Jewish people, actively propagate the unification of the Jewish people if it's already a unified organism?
Well, let's see. I think what you can do is, with respect to your part in it, it is possible to become disconnected. It's very interesting. I haven't seen people remark on this, but it's maybe so obvious, it goes without saying. There's a punishment called kores. Kores means being cut off from God. That's what it means. But in every place but one where the Torah talks about the crime and the punishment of kores, it says being cut off from the Jewish people. The soul will be cut off from its people. So it is possible to be cut off from the Jewish people. And what the pasuk is telling you is, if you're cut off from the Jewish people, ipso facto, you're cut off from God. There's no such thing as relating to God on your own, independently. There is no such thing. By the way, if you look at the lives of the patriarchs, what you will see is that the way they related to God was for the sake of the nation that's coming out of them. It wasn't individual, even in their case. The nation didn't exist yet. but they are relating to God as the progenitors of that nation. So it's really a national connection. Now, I'll leave it now. Maybe the misunderstanding won't take place. At any rate, so you can operate on your contribution to the nation by living out your connection to the nation in the most exclusive way. That's one of the reasons why Hasidim use this formula before they do every mitzvah. I'm doing it b'shem kol Yisrael. I'm doing it as a piece of the Jewish nation. That's part of my consciousness when I do a mitzvah. That's a very, very important statement. That consciousness itself and dedicating your mitzvah to that goal is the way in which you contribute to that unification. I'm talking about the unification outside of you. Maybe there are ways to do that as well, inspiring people to do this, so therefore there will be more. I don't know. I can't. I don't have first-hand knowledge of it. I can just guess. But and this is how you participate. And of course, if you dedicate yourself that your mitzvahs should contribute to the whole, that expresses your worthiness to receive also from the mitzvahs that other people do, which contribute to the whole.
That also applies for the giving or receiving?
Let's see, that's important. That's a nice point.
That's how you were talking about.
Yes, I think that's right. You see, we were talking before about something that was absolutely separate. We're talking about two different ways in which God relates to the world. You're right in saying that people are compounds. Nothing in the world. This is fascinating. You take things that are simple in themselves, they have profound theological consequences. God is one. God alone is one. God alone is one. So if God is one, only God is one, then every other thing is a compound of some kind. And our view is that everything is a compound of something male and something female. She says, but I'm a man, so I'm a male. Uh-huh. Yes, you are. And being male means being partly female. And vice versa. Nothing is pure. Nothing is pure. Nothing's one-dimensional. Only God is pure. Only God is singular. So everything else is compound. Everything else has, if you could be mostly one thing, but you have a sub-part that's the other, so that you are a compound, not one-dimensional. Can't be one-dimensional. So therefore there'll be giving and receiving.
Characteristic sample, you're saying?
I'm sorry?
From a characteristic? Or?
Yes, in characteristics also. This is one of the big debates, I won't go into it. It's politics. It's the politics of the craziness that's going on. At any rate, this is just a little introduction to this formula, which Hasidim say, and I think you get a picture of the idea. There's great depth here. It's great depth, and when you do a mitzvah, you're connecting up in various ways to the fundamental forces that run the world. That's in 2 lines. Those 2 lines you say over and over again for every mitzvah. Then there's the paragraph below, which describes the unique features of each particular mitzvah. That's different for each mitzvah. But those 2 lines are the same for every mitzvah, where we say the thing. Okay.
What do you think you upload this video?